Well, moving into the winter here in Axis Empires, 1946, going into 47. What happened? Well, let's look at the card plays. The Japanese played the Ketsugo defense plan. Puts an interceptor in the box that you're probably not going to see, some infantry steps, whatever. Allies played Operation Olympic, a couple big blitz markers, and some additional support. Most particularly, they get conditional events of troops because they're in Japan. And then finally, the Russians played Chinese nationalism, which caused a Chinese incident. Now, that Chinese incident ended up being the withdrawal of the Chinese communists. Not completely, but they've now got a policy, a treaty, which actually has to come down one. They have to drop at one level. It should be at the yellow level. It's going to take a few turns for them to get rid of that. It drops down to an armistice. And then we'll go to negotiations and then goes back to war. But in the meantime, although it slows things down for them, it does bring a communist Chinese headquarters into the box. And the Chinese were having a hard time, coming to grips with this force. I probably screwed up by not trying to finish it quicker. Anyway, what have we gotten in terms of the battlefield? Well, the Allies are moving forces up to India, concentrating in China, and trying to shift around in Japan. The movement here hasn't gone well. That big mechanized army is down to just a single-step corps trying to fight its way north. So the Japanese are certainly putting some resistance. They took some heavy losses, but they still have a headquarters up here, which is pretty significant. And against the Russians, they're just causing a lot of damage to the Russians. So overall, it looks like the Japanese have actually managed a significant level of halting of the Allies. We're going to have to see, because once we get here, we might end up getting to a treaty that's more advantageous to the Japanese than the historical unconditional surrender. Let's keep going. So we've made the swing into 1947. Here we are in January-February turn. Again, not a lot can be happening, but for the U.S., they went and destroyed the Japanese down here, positioning themselves to move straight against Tokyo. They're probably going to use a bomber against Tokyo. See, it's hard. That's a tough decision because they've got this island to cross into and everything. It's just going to be just as bad if they bomb Tokyo, probably. So it's a hard call. But here they made a landing at Tokatan. And why is that important, other than being a victory point space, which is, of course, and was easy to take, is that it gives them direct access to shipping in the Sea of Okhotsk. And why that's important is now they can drop naval units into either these three or these three spaces, and preferably these three, and prevent the Japanese from being able to supply anything outside of Japan itself. Big deal there. That means no support units or anything are going to be used out here, and the Russians will have a much easier time. They're having a tough time here because of those headquarters, etc. Not so much the actual support units, which can't really do much. It's also, kind of painful for the U.S. forces up here that are fighting in Hope, although they've managed to liberate it at this point. And we'll get that counter in the delay box. And the Hope pieces are now available. What happened? Yeah, the Russians' support for the Chinese has gotten their minor country production up to +2. This is like a partnership country. They have the option. Did they want to raise that? Did they want to take an interceptor? They wanted to raise that. That's going to increase the rate of troops that are going to come in. They don't need an interceptor because the Japanese are not going to be able to expend air power to defend what they're holding outside of Japan. All right, well, that's the end of the turn. We've had a little bit of naval action because of that invasion attempt. A little bit of other units that have to be rolled for. But yeah, for the most part, taking Japan is not an easy task. So here we are, end of March, April. New card play, 1947. Japanese Tenno Heika Banzai. What is this? Well, for one thing, it hit them with a command failure, which isn't good. They lost a support unit due to it. But they get this neat Imperial Guards headquarters, which they managed to slip out up here. Yeah, you see Sapporo. And as long as that's on the map, the Japanese are going to get to, well, as long as it's in a city, the Japanese are going to get to replacement steps per turn during the conditional offense phase. Well, the Allies couldn't have that, especially since they're set up beating up on what's in Tokyo. This was hard enough as it is. Yes, there's this, and there's all kinds of stuff that they're going to have trouble getting to, but the Allies had to send their fleets in place, cut off Japanese supplies to the mainland. Japanese have no ability to support anymore. Well, but the Allied keeping the blockade is going to be painful for them. But they also devastated this hex, which actually means that they did not need to put this fleet here, did they? Yes, they did, because there's a port here. Okay, so now the Japanese could conceivably try to slip around and get supplies somewhere, but there's nowhere to really get them beyond trying to funnel them through these coastal areas. So unless they can get them to here, there's a fleet there, so they can't cut through there. There's no supplies back here. That's all Allied territory now. We also have the Allies pushing into India, and they've been successful over here at Calcutta. But there's still a lot of India left to traverse before they can get to the next thing they can hit. And these headquarters are kind of slow. They may need to break down. The troop train can't sail them straight across, so it's going to be hard to get the supplies in place quickly enough. Meanwhile, the Russians are struggling up here in the north, not able to make any headway. Americans pushing through up here through Hope into Manchukuo, and just making things kind of ugly there. Ooh, the Russians aren't in that bad a shape, because these guys were out of supply by the time the Russian turn came. Gotta look into that. The Russians took a attrition loss, and they probably shouldn't have. I'll have to look. They've got like 2 shifts in their favor. Alright, well, that's the end of that turn. We'll fix what the Russians did and come back. Something I'm not sure I said, I think I didn't, was I had to bomb this and make it not a city so that those troops don't keep coming. That's a replacement rate I can't really sustain even. I can't face as the Allies. So cutting that thing off and destroying the city it's under became a necessity. Anyway, moving on. Political events, along with other things, have cleared out Manchuria, and the Japanese are no longer there. The bad weather has stopped the Allied, including the Russian offensive, essentially, from proceeding too much afield, but they did make it into whatever, Mukden, and down here, knocking out the supplies that the Japanese had. I think I'm probably going to call it after the summer. I want to see what happens and how that works out, how that plays out, because that's kind of, there's something interesting coming up. But, other than that, it's really kind of okay, are we just letting the Japanese, historically the Japanese surrendered in a situation that probably was not as bad as what they're facing right here, in terms of most of Japan taking, etc. They've lost the game, there's no question of that. So now the only question is, well, what kind of surrender is it? Is the U.S. going to force this to every last man? Or would they, as they historically did, and I said unconditional surrender, that's the terminology that was used, but it wasn't. The Japanese were unwilling, for example, to give up the emperor, and that was stipulated quite clearly. So it wasn't an unconditional surrender, and I don't think you'd see that in this circumstance either. You'd see probably something not too different from the historical surrender. There's no atomic bombs here, but the Japanese have enough force to hold off in their islands. Certainly different from what Germany faced after the war in terms of, what their position was. The question here, though, is, would Japan continue to fight on? Would this situation go on? The Imperial Guard headquarters flying away and then getting, the city destroyed under them. I don't think so, but I wanted to play it out a little further. And we'll keep doing that. One last thing, I usually, when I played out the cards and was taking steps on everything, I had time to catch everything. Well, here, I didn't catch this. I played it out correctly, but I just didn't catch it on the video. The command failure happens every turn. This is the gift that keeps giving, right? So they lost their support unit, which was an interceptor, this turn as well. But in the upcoming turn, they will be able to keep what they have. And at this point, they'll have a carrier fleet. Chemical weapons, not as good as I thought they were. I thought they were a step loss to the enemy. They're a trade-off. Both sides lose an extra step loss. Not interesting to the Japanese at this point in the game. May have been before, helped their attacks, especially when I was cheating in their favor with it. But right now, no. And I gotta remember to roll for the China. I didn't do that either. So let's look at the cards to begin with on the May-June turn or whatever. Military conspiracy on the Japanese. Well, this was a military takeover. I had to look up the rules for that. I put a counter over in the strategic warfare box, but I don't know what it does. Maybe it gives a hint over here. I failed. -1 to strategic value. I think that's a -1 to their victory points. The strategic value is the amount of victory points that they have. So we're deeper into Allied Crusade territory here. Painful little occurrence, but it does give them extra steps of infantry supposedly. But here's the problem: they have nowhere to put them. They're already filled up. Actually, they get to get one in here because I moved one out of there and then put it into place. So we get an extra step there. I'm trying to... no, that's not a city. I can't build it there. And I can't build it there. That was full. Yeah, there really isn't a place to put them, and that's the problem. Japan's so devastated at this point. I have no additional cities to lay forces down. And then the Allies continuing their stranglehold, continuing to attack Tokyo. Now Tokyo can get troops, and with me not having to use so many air units to just get an attack on Tokyo means that I can keep building more stuff there, but that's the trade-off there. For the Russians, they're moving more and more forces, a new logistics marker. They've taken another location, and they'll be pushing down. Now I was at -5. I'm a couple further along at this point. But what I didn't get is I didn't manage to get into Manchukuo. I didn't manage to get into Vladivostok. These territories are, open and easily taken, but they haven't fallen yet. The big thing I wanted to show was the Manhattan Project. Unfortunately, I didn't get the successful die roll. I got a strategy board one. I've got a couple more turns where it can happen, and I'm going to play those out. But I'm going to load this up because I like to do a little bit of discussion during the wrap-up anyway. Russians just pumping out more troops. I don't know. This is probably going to just take a review anyway, so I'll just keep rolling because I don't think I'm going to play beyond the summer. I just don't see the point to continuing pushing the Japanese. They're clearly losing the war. They're clearly in a lot of trouble, yet I can probably drag it out to VJ Day here. Well, the Allies managed to get an atomic weapon to go off up here on the Sakhalin Island, of all things. They still haven't taken Tokyo. I'm going to call it here. I could launch another attack with the Russians, but there's just not much of interest left anymore. Quick count of victory points. Let's take a quick look at what we're talking there, and I'll come back in a moment. But I don't think that I've even pushed it here. I was at -5. What have I taken? Well, let's say we took one of those. I don't think I can get another one, so that's 1, 2. Looks like 2 more hexes, so that's like 7. It's just not going to push it even to the -9, which would be the victory on this map. It's going to happen. It's just a tedious amount of playing to allow that. And I think at this point, very easily, the Allies have demonstrated not just that they have the capacity to take Japan out militarily, physically, with the Russians coming back, but that they also have this technological bonus with the atomic bomb. And I think it's a good point to stop. For all the cheating and everything that I did, I do have to admit that Thomas Prowell's statement and the rest of the design team's statement that this game is very resilient. I mean, it was really hard. I still ended up with a fair and interesting game. I think probably somebody who knew what they were doing a little better might have been able to defend the Axis a little better. Maybe I cheated in the Allies' favor and just never heard about it because I haven't been getting as much feedback coming back on stuff that I've posted this week where the Allied advances are really heavy. It's hard to tell, but it does sort of play out anyway. No matter how you play it, I think you're going to get World War II out of it. That could be a positive or negative factor, and we'll touch on that in the review, I believe. But anyway, with the play, I'll tell you one thing. It was a lot easier when it got smaller. Getting it down to one board, man, that's manageable for me, right? Well, 2 boards, whatever. The big 4 maps, especially facing different directions with a lot of attention on both, that's always hard for me. This isn't the only game that happens with. It's just a little bit too much for me to pay attention to. I don't mind it on something like Europa Universalis, where one map or one pair of maps is 90% of my attention over in Europe, and the rest is just kind of there. And I guess in a way, if you were playing this with multiple people, it would be very easy. If I was playing only on the Pacific map or only on the European map, I would have a lot more focus. But having to switch, especially switching between the card play choices and that whole context switch, very difficult, especially solitaire. Found the same kind of issue with Advanced Third Reich and with Whiff the one time I tried it solitaire. And yeah, that'll be coming at some point. All right, I'm going to load this up and clean up, and then I'm going to talk about the game as a whole and what my opinions and thoughts are about it.